The bell beakers culture evolved into the urnfield culture, which is called that because, you guessed it, they made fields of urns. Hello there, I'm Simon. Welcome to my channel. It's time for a journey through time. This week I'm starting a new series on this channel. I'm gonna do a series of videos about the history of Belgium, so I hope you like it. Anyway, let us begin. So, where do we begin? Now, I'm told the very beginning is a good place to start. So the question is, what's the very beginning? I mean, if we go all the way back to the very, very beginning, we're talking about the Big Bang. And at that point, there's not really anything there to call Belgium yet. Although, fun fact, the theory of the Big Bang was actually conceived by a guy called Georges Lemaitre, a priest who worked as a professor at the University of Leuven. Louvain, this one. So, let's fast forward a little to the dawn of mankind, or womankind. Now, it took a while before people actually managed to get out of Africa and reach these lands. But when they did, we had early men and women running around hunting and gathering, and Neanderthals. Fun fact, while I'm at it, you know where the name Neanderthal actually comes from? It actually comes from the Greek neos andros, which means new man. Makes sense, right? I mean, scientists discover a new kind of man, so they call it new man. Thing is that has nothing to do with it. It's actually just named after the German valley where the first specimen was found, which took its name from a guy called Neumann, who wanted to be fancy, so he Grekified his name. So at this point, Belgian history is basically European history, right? So hunter-gatherers discover agriculture, and around 6500 before the Common Era, BCE, the North Sea appeared. Now I know what you're thinking. What the Hades do you mean the North Sea appeared? Well, before that time, the world didn't quite look the way it does now. There was actually an entire chunk of land where the North Sea is now, and it was called Doggerland. I guess there were a lot of dogs living there? I don't know. But then sea levels rose and the land was covered by seawater, turning Doggerland into the North Sea. If we then fast forward a couple thousands of years to around 2500 before the Common Era, we see the rise of the so-called bell beaker culture. 3 guesses why it's called that. A little tip. The inventor of the telephone has nothing to do with it. It's obviously named after the pottery they found of this culture. If you've ever gone to an archaeological exhibit or museum, and I would recommend you do, you will have noticed that one of the main things they usually find of ancient cultures is their pottery. That's because it's an easy and cheap thing to produce, and it's also a much used thing. Pottery was kind of their Tupperware, so they had a lot of it, and it wasn't a big deal if it was left behind, which is why it is to be expected that archaeologists find a lot of it. Pottery is also a good thing to identify and name different cultures by, because every culture develops their own style to make it, giving scholars something to differentiate them by, and to almost follow the cultural evolution. And this culture's pottery looked a lot like a bell. A little later, which is very relative when you talk about antiquity, the bell beakers culture evolved into the urnfield culture, which is called that because, you guessed it, they made fields of urns. They changed their burial practices from just burying to cremating, and then burying the urns, which, if we're honest, is a lot more efficient. Now, why is this important? Because it is from these cultures that the so-called Hallstatt culture arose, and that is what led to the whole Celtic thing all over the place. Now, I'm not going to go too deep into Hallstatt and Latin, because this is supposed to be about Belgium. If you're interested, ask your local history teacher. Basically, between the 8th and the 5th century BCE, and by now we're talking about the Iron Age, by the way, the Urnfield culture in the Alps came into contact with Mediterranean cultures, and they flourished. The point is that they started trading, and because of that, they were able to spread their influence and culture all the way to the area we're talking about, Belgium. Now, by the time we get to the 5th century BCE, we have this guy called Herodotus. Now, this guy deserves a whole video. Nay, a whole book. Nay, a whole series of books dedicated to him. Not unlike the other stuff I've mentioned in this video, actually. Anyway, this guy is called the father of history. Obviously, he didn't start history itself. That's God's job. He's called that because he wrote a book called Historiae. And you'll never guess what that means. Actually, it means the histories, or more accurately, the inquiries. Basically, the guy went around the world, the known world that's within a distance he could practically be expected to travel to, and he asked everyone for the ancient stories of their people. Then he would tell these stories, and where they contradicted or anything, he tried to figure out what actually happened. Now, the guy was a bit gullible still, but it's not like he had anyone to show him how it's done. He was literally the first guy to do it. What does the father of history have to do with Belgium? Well, he didn't write a whole lot about the people who lived here. He kinda just listed some stuff he'd heard of, saying that he couldn't verify any of it. I mean, at that point it might be better to not say anything about it at all, but I've got to appreciate the effort. He does talk about them, and guess what he calls them? He calls them the Keltoi. Sounds familiar? It should. Yes, at this point we are talking about the Celts. So the Celts spread all around Europe and become a whole range of tribes and people. And guess what one of those tribes was called? The Nervi? Well, that's one, but not the one I mean. Try again. The Eburones? Also true, but no. The Atrebates? I'm talking about the Belgae, okay? The Belgae. Hence the name of the country. Okay, to be fair, the way I understand it, the Belgae was not really a tribe, but a group, like a federation, just to be clear. Where does the name come from? Apparently it's derived from the Celtic word for to swell or to get angry. Apparently. So yeah, Belgium was populated by the Belgae. And it stayed like that for a while, actually. Until one day, a man came from the south. He was Roman, and he came to conquer. But that's a story for another day. I think I'm gonna leave it here for now. Which means it's time for the YouTube thing. You know the drill, right? Comment, like, subscribe, share the video, etc. Also, you can find the links to my Twitter and my Goodreads below. So you can go follow if you so choose. That's it. Thanks for watching.